could start. We will be recording. We will not be recording when we go into small breakout rooms. So those are moments where I really do encourage you to take risks and be vulnerable. And again, not to bury the lead, we are going to be going into breakout rooms. This is a 90-minute workshop. If you have to jump at the hour, that's fine. I've sort of created it so you'll still get a lot of value within an hour. And again, I'm going to be encouraging us to interact. I'm going to encourage chat use. And as Linda mentioned, we are going to be doing some self-reflection. So whatever your favorite way of self-reflecting, whether that's with a journal, a notebook, or pen, feel free to get that in front of you. I like a Google Notes situation because we will be pausing periodically for self-reflection. I'll be pausing periodically for questions and comments. I won't have any planned breaks in the 90 minutes. So you are empowered to get up, have lunch, go get a drink of water, bio break, whatever you need. I also encourage you really to be present. Don't worry about the slides because I'm going to be sending you afterward a PDF. You don't have to take notes on the slides. You'll be just getting it all beautifully packaged back to you. And I'll be reserving some time at the end to take questions, but I'll also be stopping and asking periodically. Feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to jump in the chat if there's something that you really want to ask or add to the conversation. And I'm absolutely encouraging that. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. I promise this is not like a huge screen share situation that we're going to be doing today. But for us visual learners, I thought it might be helpful. So welcome to Stop Selling Yourself Short, Befriending Fear. If there's one takeaway that I want you to take away, it's this, that fear is normal, but it's a faker. And there are tools you can use to challenge it. So this is the main takeaway. Fear is normal, but it's a faker, and there are tools you can use to challenge it. Our objectives today are to enhance our understanding and relationship to cognitive behavioral systems, that is, thinking, feeling, and acting around fear, risk-taking, motivation, and confidence. I'm going to be challenging. We're going to challenge our innate and common hesitancy to take risks. And then together, we're going to share our challenges and experiences to build camaraderie within this group, and feel free to take it outside the group as well. So in a second, I'm going to share some group norms, sort of the normal ways we behave in this workshop. But before we do that, I'd love you to reflect on these questions, just for a little bit of intention setting. And I'll read them out loud, but what did you have to give up to attend this 90-minute workshop? Just consider that to yourself. What did you have to give up? What are you willing to do to make this time worth your while? And lastly, how do you believe you can be better as a result of a workshop on fear, confidence, risk-taking, getting out of our comfort zone? And the norms that we have for this workshop is always keep at top of mind respect for yourself and others. I'm encouraging, as you know, courageous and active participation, and very apropos for this workshop, to take risks for the sake of learning and growth. So our agenda sort of flows from our main point: fear is normal, it's a faker. We're going to give you some skills and tools to challenge it. And then we're really going to be bringing periodically the insights that we get, how they bear on our own life. So to that point, I'm going to stop my screen share. I'd love to get to what the workshop part of this, what this means, what workshop means and could mean to you. So grab your journal, grab your pen and notebook, grab whatever it is you want to take notes on. So I'm going to read a quote, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions, self-reflection questions for you to keep for yourself. And you might recognize the quote from the workshop information, but here it goes. A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for. A ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. As you reflect on that quote and maybe the 8 examples I gave you earlier, in what ways might you be selling yourself short or playing it safe at work or in life? Go ahead and note these to yourself. What ways might you be selling yourself short or playing it safe at work or in life? What are some audacious goals that you might like to have instead? Instead of selling yourself short, what would you like to do specifically? For example, if you knew you could not fail, what would you like to do? If failure was not possible, what would you like to do? When you think about doing some of the things you've listed, what are some of the thoughts that come up? What fears? What ifs? What emotions come up as the fears come up? What emotions come up as you consider these goals? So begin to wrap up your thoughts. We're gonna come back to this, and as we go through the workshop, I invite you to bear these examples in mind, so that when we come to an idea, a learning, or a principle, you can apply it to your own life. That's why it's a workshop and not a lecture. So apply it to your specific examples. Really, these are your test subjects. So to kick us off here, a very short part of of today is going to be talking about that fear is normal. I've already queued that up for you. Fear is completely a normal reaction, emotion that we have. And I'd love to stop talking for a second and have you guys talk. So would anyone be brave? Come off mute, raise your hand, or feel free to just jump off mute and tell us, what is the evolutionary purpose for fear? What's the evolutionary reason for fear? Who'd like to give that a guess, even if you're not entirely sure? Okay, so Eleanor in the chat, survival. Would anyone like to add that? Add your voice to that? Okay, I've got Mina raised her hand. Um, I'm sure there's a way I can. Mina, why don't you go ahead and Mira? I'm sorry, come off mute and share with us.
Okay, so I think that just like all emotions, it probably is an indicator of danger, or it's kind of emotions have like a feeling type of data for the individual.
Yeah, and what's helpful about feeling danger? Recognizing, having a sign of danger.
In the past, it probably kept human beings alive.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you've nailed it, Mira. You're exactly right. Fear essentially, it keeps us alive. Maybe more broadly, it keeps us safe. So that's exactly right. So fear is a reasonable, normal thing to happen. I'm going to ask maybe a similar question, but I don't think it's going to be harder, but maybe it will be. So when I went down that list and people threw the numbers in the chat of which fears that they might resonate with, or ways they're playing themselves short, something that tends to come up a lot is when fear is manifesting itself in relation to other people. So fear of asking for that promotion, fear of being public speaking, fear of speaking your voice, fear of adding your point of view. We're always so worried about what other people think. Would anyone want to add to what Mira was just, sharing with us around why do you think it might be that we are particularly fearful when it comes to how other people might perceive us, or what other people might think about us? Feel free to come off mute and share, even if you're not entirely sure. I see some, okay. Kim Hind, Kim and or Hind, why would it be helpful for us to seek inclusion? Why would it be helpful for us to have a need for belonging and connection? Maybe from an evolutionary standpoint, or even now. Wendy, you are totally nailing it. And it's fine if you don't want to come off mute, although you said it beautifully, that we are afraid of being excluded from the group for safety reasons. So if you can imagine billions of years ago on the savannas of Africa or wherever we were, imagine if all of a sudden we woke up and our tribe was nowhere to be seen. Again, would be an extremely scary situation. It's not like a human day where we've got faucets and heating. This could have actually meant death. So again, there's a real evolutionary reason that we crave connection, and why it's particularly scary and uncomfortable for us when we're having to put ourselves out there in front of other people. If anyone has a fear, and I've mentioned a couple of them, fear of speaking up, public speaking, feel free to throw it in the chat. Feel free to, oh, Chris, I like this, your pack animals, absolutely. Does anyone have an example of a fear they have, or something that's super uncomfortable for them, or even moderately uncomfortable, that has to do with other people, that has to do with, what we're worried that other people might think? Oh, thanks, Chris, for putting that in the chat. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can do so in that Google Doc. I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier. Amy, exactly. Show me a woman in corporate America or an entrepreneur that is not worried about being judged for what they say, and that would be a rare woman indeed. Person, really. We're all often so worried about what other people think of us, when probably the likelihood is they're not thinking much about us at all. So we do tend to over-index on this worry about other people. So I go through all this just to share that fear is normal, that there are underlying reasons. Like this, these are fears we all share. These are fears that are normal, they have evolutionary purpose to them. I want to start just holding this all in mind. I want to move on to sort of the second main point of today, which is fear as a faker. And I'm going to introduce that with another quote, and this goes to my one of my favorite authors, Mark Twain. And he said this, he said, "I am an old man and I've known a great many troubles, but most of them have never happened." So let me share an example that's true for me. So I am terrified of flying. The moment the plane starts moving on the tarmac, my pulse starts to race, my palms get sweaty, my mind starts to call off, like, let me off this thing. I am like death gripping my husband's knee. And anytime there's turbulence, I go in complete survival mode, like as if somehow I could identify myself a mechanical failure and like get up and fix it. But I'm on like hyper vigilant mode. At the same time, like it kind of makes sense from an evolutionary perspective that it would be terrifying to be 30,000 feet above the ground. I don't really understand how a plane works, but so my body, my emotions, my thoughts, they're completely reacting to this situation. I'm going to share my slides again just to emphasize this point. And have any of you ever heard this? I forget what it's called when you have the letters that mean the first four letters of false evidence appearing real. They give you the word fear. So what I'm sort of saying in that fear is a faker is that it's false evidence appearing real. And what do I mean? What's real? What do I mean by this? So using my example, my experience on that airplane, believe me, it is real. I am genuinely pretty scared. My thoughts, the thought like, let me out of here, that's a real thought. My emotions, those emotions of fear, of anxiety, my palms are sweating, all of those things are actually happening to me. So what is not real is that your emotions always reflect reality, that your thoughts always reflect reality. And this little box on the screen here is supposed to indicate reality. And I unfortunately went down the rabbit hole of how safe plane riding is. And actually, maybe it's a good thing because there's a 0.0000, like 70% chance of dying in a plane crash. And probably that's what I'm scared of. And so when I say that fear is not real or it's a faker, what I mean is our fear does not necessarily, and quite often, in fact, does not match reality. Now, I have a little footnote that says, okay, look, sometimes it is scary. If I was doing public speaking in front of a bunch of like polar bears or something, like I think I would have something to be scared of. But as far as planes, especially like transportation as we know it, very, very, very safe. I want to bring us into this idea that fear is a faker. And another word for that is a cognitive distortion. In other words, what you're thinking does not match reality. Another maybe easier to remember phrase about this is thinking traps. And thinking traps, as you can see from the slide here, they are exaggerated or irrational generally negative thought patterns. They're generally negative because negative helps us survive. They can lead us to things that aren't necessarily true. And these can be dangerous because they impact our emotions and our behaviors. So let me give you a couple of examples of these. And I'm always so excited to share thinking traps because I think everyone can recognize them. And I have a whole list of them that I'll share with you after in the deck after the program. So some thinking traps examples are emotional reasoning, basing your thoughts, beliefs, and interpretations on your emotional reactions. So the equivalent of this would be, the plane is unsafe because I'm scared. I'm embarrassed about what I did at the party. Therefore, no one wants to talk to me. No one will want to talk to me again. Basing your beliefs on your feelings. Catastrophizing. I don't know a single person that doesn't do this, or just overemphasizing the negative. Again, it's a very evolutionary purpose that we have for this, but overestimating the consequences of something negative happening. And feel free to raise your hand in the chat or put yes in the chat if this happens to you. But like, how many times as you're preparing for work, you start to go down that spiral of, well, if I don't do this, then it's going to get me fired. I feel like the entrepreneurial equivalent of this is, if I don't do this if I don't do my job exactly right, I am going to lose everything I have and end up on a cardboard box in the street. There's always this sort of fear of financial ruin when it comes to being an entrepreneur. So something that's very, very scary. Again, makes absolutely no sense. There's a million ways I could survive before getting to the cardboard box on the street stage. But I can tell you that the fear that I have about it as an entrepreneur is very real. Fortune telling, assuming that you know what's going to happen in the future. For example, if I don't get in the right school, if I don't get this specific promotion, if I don't get this specific title, then I'm not going to be successful. Thinking we can predict the future. The unfortunate, or just the way it is that we cannot predict the future. That is just the way the world works. So I'm going to start bringing this back to us again, or you, I should say. And so to integrate what we're learning here into your own life. And we're going to do a self-reflection exercise. And after that self-reflection exercise, you're going to have an opportunity to discuss it with a small group, a small intimate group that you're totally free to get vulnerable with. So refresh yourself on the thoughts and feelings that accompany some of the ideas, the big dreams, the goals, the things you would do if you did not fail. Start to refresh yourself on those notes that you took for yourself earlier. And I'm going to read out a couple of self-reflection questions. Feel free to go off video if it makes you more comfortable. And then after this, we're going to share out with the chat. So as you consider the thoughts and feelings that accompany reaching your goals, what thinking traps might be present? What assumptions might you make? Where might you be not connecting your emotions or thoughts with reality? Might you be basing your beliefs on your emotional reactions, i.e. emotional reasoning? Might you be overestimating the possibility or consequences of something negative happening? Catastrophizing. Might you be assuming that you know what will happen in the future for sure if you do X, Y, Z? Might you be fortune telling? What other thinking traps might be present? What other exaggerated or irrational thought patterns might be present? And one way that you can start to filter these for yourself is, if a friend was listening to you talk about your worries, talk about your concerns, what assumptions or irrational thoughts might they notice? What would a friend say about your worries or concerns? So take a couple moments to consider these questions. So we're going to go into small group breakouts and share what that experience was like for you. Remember our norm, respect yourself and others, and only share what you're comfortable with. So we're going to meet for about 8 minutes. But halfway through, I'm going to broadcast a final question or two. So if you are rocking and rolling with the initial questions, and let me go ahead and share these in the chat so you will, I just saw a misspelling that I'm correcting right here, but let me throw these questions in the chat. So as you go into your breakout rooms, these are the questions I'd like you to discuss. What did you learn about yourself from that self-reflection exercise on thinking traps? What was interesting or insightful? What stood out about that exercise? And what questions do you have? Discuss. And then again, I'll throw some other ones halfway. But Chris, I think if we could go into groups of 4 for about 8 minutes, that would be ideal. And go ahead and whisk everybody away when you're ready. So let me go ahead and flip through these next couple slides, because these are things that you can practice, whether it's in the session today at home. And these are how to challenge your thinking traps when you're in one of those cognitive distortions. And I recognize that our conversation has changed a little bit, and that's absolutely beautiful and great. But so you have this information for later. This idea of distancing yourself from your thoughts. If you are in a cognitive distortion, recognizing that you're the observer of your thoughts, that just something like, I notice I'm having the XYZ thought again. I'm the thinker of XYZ thought. Another thing I like to do is a name it to tame it. It's an easy to remember exercise where, when I start to get scared as an entrepreneur, then I'm not necessarily feeling safe from a financial standpoint. I remind myself, this is a worry that just comes back to me again and again. And I just name it as my fear of ending up in a cardboard box of the street gremlin. So to give you these exercises that you can practice both in the session and on your own. And we're going to be moving into an exercise in a second that has to do with challenging your thoughts. So looking for evidence before and against what might be a cognitive distortion. Notice if it's a pattern. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also challenge your thinking traps and challenge your thoughts, which might not always be true, by asking, what would you tell a friend in the same situation? I want to tell a quick little story because we've been talking about things that we are, I'm going to stop my share here. We've been talking about things that we are afraid of, or we are, hesitant to do, hesitant to speak up, hesitant to call out, what's really, to name what's going on in our environments, in our society, in our workplaces. And I also want to mention that, sometimes what's also true is that the comfort zone that we get into, it can be like a soft cradle. It can be hard to get out of. So sometimes it's the things that we're not scared of that we might actually need to be concerned about. So, everyone at this point is familiar with microbrews. I don't know if you have one, a microbrewery near you, one you visit on vacation. But, in my lifetime, this microbrews are new. Believe it or not, there was at some point someone had to bring microbrews to the United States. And it's this gentleman named Jim Koch who started Sam Adams Brewery, back almost 40 years ago. And he shared this really interesting framework. I was listening to an interview with him, and it's around safety and risk, and that there are things in life that are scary, but not dangerous, and things that are dangerous and not scary. And it's the latter that we really have to watch out for. So the analogy he uses is that in the rock climbing world, something like rappelling, it's scary, but it's not dangerous. The apparatus, the ropes, the harnesses, the pulleys, these could hold up a car if they needed to. Now, no doubt that it's scary to be gazing down a sheer cliff face, but it's not actually dangerous. So a cognitive distortion. On the other hand, strolling on a sunny ice field on a warm spring day, it's not scary. That would feel like a beautiful, easy walk. But if the ice is melting because it's a warm spring day, when enough of it does, there might be an avalanche. And that's really where the danger might be. So the analogy is to say that before Jim Koch created Sam Adams, he was a managerial consultant. He had great benefits, amazing office, connections to important people, and there was no reason to leave. He was super, super comfortable. But what he's sharing is that it was actually dangerous, was mistaking this comfort for not dangerous. it would have been not scary for him to continue to be in this managerial consultant role for the rest of his life. But the danger was not starting Sam Adams. The danger was not bringing microbrews into our world. The danger was having lived another 30 or 40 years in his life and to look back and have had serious regrets. So as I share this idea that there are situations out there that are dangerous but not necessarily scary, does anyone have something like that that's happened to them, whether that's recently, currently, in the past? An example of something that wasn't scary, but maybe in hindsight was dangerous. Well, I will share then. Just, the other day I was it was Martin Luther King Day. I was getting lunch with my husband, and I had just done all this research on the airplane and what the likelihood of crashing is, and I found out that the most common way that women my age die is actually household accidents. And as I'm getting lunch with my husband, I ended up choking on a fish bone. It just sort of stayed lodged back there for a couple of hours until I think I coughed it up because I didn't want to go to the emergency room. But that's a perfect example of, I wasn't expecting it at all. I was in my comfort zone going out to lunch with my husband, and something that might have actually been dangerous happened. I want to start bringing this back to you in relation to your lives. And I want to do a self-reflection exercises to challenge our thinking traps, to get us motivated to start moving towards those goals that we have set for ourselves earlier, and to really just have you think about those things in a different way. So again, if you want to go off video, if you want to get comfortable in your seat, please go ahead and do so. And while you're getting comfortable, just refresh yourself on those last notes and bring to mind what we've been discussing earlier in this session, the ways in which you're selling yourself short, what you would like for yourself instead, your audacious goals. So for this exercise, I'm asking you to pick just one. Pick one stretch goal, something you'd like to do if you knew you couldn't fail. And just take a second to decide. Go ahead and write it down. It's going to be the focus for this exercise and for the rest of the session. So write down one thing that you might be afraid to do, one boundary you want to push, one place you want to speak up, one place you want to make a difference. So consider, what risky steps or leaps of faith would you need to make to reach that goal? And note those down. What risky steps or leaps of faith would you need to make to reach that goal? Bearing those in mind, let's first consider worst case scenario of taking this risk. And I'm going to ask you a couple questions about what's worst case scenario if you ended up doing these things you have in mind. So what is it? What's the absolute worst that could happen? What are the fears, doubts, and what ifs that pop up as you consider this? What's the absolute worst that could happen if you took this risk? If these fears came true, would it result in death? Would it be the end of your life if your fears came true? What would the genuinely permanent impact be on a scale 1 to 10 if the worst came to pass? What would the genuine or real impact be on a scale 1 to 10 if the worst happened? Are these worst case scenarios really permanent? Are they permanent? Now, how likely do you think it is, realistically, that the worst case would come to pass? How likely is it, say on a scale 1 to 10, that the worst would happen? Now, assuming something bad did happen, what steps could you take to repair the damage? What steps could you take to get things back on the upswing if you started to notice that we were sliding towards worst case scenario? How could you get things back moving in the forward direction or positive direction? How could you get things back under control? I'm going to pause for a second to just let you wrap up these thoughts, considering the worst case scenario before moving on. What's the realistic impact of the worst case scenario? If it's permanent, how likely it is, if it happened to you, how you might repair the damage. So go ahead and wrap up your thoughts on worst case scenario. Now let's shift. Rather than worst case scenario, consider the most probable scenario. What is the most likely outcome or outcomes if you were to take this risk? What's most likely? What are the benefits, both temporary and permanent, of these more probable scenarios? What are the benefits? Now, these could be internal, things like confidence, resilience, new skills, or these can be like external, like specific results. So what are the benefits of the more likely scenarios? Now, what would the permanent impact of these more likely outcomes be? What would the permanent impact of the benefits of these more likely scenarios be? How likely is it that you could produce at least a moderately good outcome? How likely on a scale 1 to 10 is it that you could produce at least a moderately good outcome? Have other people, less intelligent, skilled, or hardworking than you, done this before and pulled it off? I'm going to pause here for a second to let you wrap up, just considering these most likely case scenario, the realistic benefits of it, the impact of the realistic benefits, how likely it is, and if others less gifted than you have accomplished it before. Last questions here. Recognize that staying where you are is also a choice. What is it costing you financially, emotionally, and physically to postpone action? If you don't pursue the dreams that you listed, where will you be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? Where will you be? And how will you feel in 10 years, having allowed X more years of your finite life pass without taking action? If you don't pursue the things listed, where will you be and how will you feel about it? So start to wrap up this inner exploration. We're going to do something similar to last time, where we're going to go to breakout rooms and we're going to meet for, I guess we should do 8 minutes again, Chris, just to share again, what you learned about that, what was insightful. So I'll throw the questions in the chat and I'll put them there for you. But what did you learn about yourself in the self-reflection exercise around fear? And what was insightful for you? What stood out? I'll also broadcast another question about halfway through, but you can go ahead, Chris, and do breakout groups of about 4 again. Your points right here. I'm going to come back to this, but exposure therapy, and I think this gets back to what you were saying, Kim. It takes baby steps, right? You cannot just meet a dog. You go in small little bits, right? You maybe see a picture of a dog and then you meet a really friendly dog from, a block away. And then maybe you get a little closer. So exposure therapy is all about taking baby steps in a safe environment to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so, Kim, I think what you might have been getting at, I mean, and it's a really beautiful thought about what about pacing our trying? Like, absolutely, pace yourself in small, manageable baby steps. Do this in a safe environment, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. So, like I was saying, I'm afraid of public speaking, and yet I've joined Toastmasters, which is this international organization for people to learn how to public speak, because it's a safe environment, because they've come up with a step-by-step plan for me to feel comfortable with public speaking. So, and I will tell you that even the seasoned public speakers, even though they're excited, which I'm excited to be sharing with you all today, they still have that fear. There's still a little bit of nervousness that comes up. So getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And going back maybe to Nancy's point, I think I have a slide that illustrates that. There's something about taking action is going to build that confidence. If Nancy didn't go through, she's the queen, our goddess of reinvention here. If she hadn't taken all those actions in her life, she would have never developed that resilience, that confidence to continue going. Think about learning how to ride a bike. If you never tried, you'd never develop the resilience. And I have this cute little picture here that says, this is another thinking trap. We often maximize our concerns about what might be in the future while minimizing all of the resilience, skills, and strengths that we had to get us there. So I'm going to give you these slides, but here's a little just recap on our tools and skills. And I'm recognizing our time, and I do want to sort of do one more. This is an individual reflection exercise. So I want to integrate everything that we've learned from each other. I want to integrate even the slides that I just went through really quickly. So again, refresh yourself on that big challenge. I want to, again, feel free to turn your cameras off. Feel free to get your notepad back out. I want to just kind of bring us to a nice conclusion here. And remind yourself, maybe by writing them down while they're still fresh, because our ideas have a way of floating away from themselves. What are your biggest takeaways about fear, complacency, motivation, and confidence? What are your takeaways here? What did you learn about your audacious goal? What did you learn about yourself? Bearing these in mind, what would it look like to apply exposure therapy to your goal? How would you imagine taking baby steps in a safe environment, knowing that it requires getting comfortable with the uncomfortable? What would exposure therapy look like? What would a baby steps in a safe environment look like? What would you need to remind yourself that getting uncomfortable, like getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's normal that it's uncomfortable. What might help you remember that? And then who or what might support you? Who's going to support this baby step? Who or what might support you in taking this very first baby step? What accountability, if any, would be helpful for you? What accountability, if any, would be helpful for you? So go ahead and wrap up your thoughts on exposure therapy, stretching and baby steps in a safe environment, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And as you're wrapping up your thoughts and taking notes for yourself, I want to reiterate something that Chris said earlier, and maybe she can share the link in the chat that Cornell is inviting you to create a mentorship partnership with someone else. And it could be helpful to have an accountability partner for this. It's always helpful to have support. It's helpful to have someone to help normalize the experiences you're going through. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed having you. Thanks to the Women's Innovators Initiative at CTL for having me. And I just really loved your energy, and I loved your women supporting women, as Anne said before. That's what we're all here for.